Half a day. My name is Miss Kenzie Conway, or as my students called me this semester, Miss Conway. I was a student teacher for 5th grade in Mrs. Diaz's class. In my class, we had 18 students, 9 girls and 9 boys. And of those students, we had Chamorro, Filipino, Chukis, and mixed students in our class. And in my class as well, we had 1 ELL student and 3 GATE students. The unit that I covered with these pre and post tests were for our reading unit. So the standard, which is presented here, that we are covering, talks about scientific, technical, and historic texts. So when I started student teaching, the students were covering historic texts. And then when it became time for me to begin planning the instructional calendar and taking over in the classroom, we began technical texts. So I wanted to come up with a way that we could see where the students were with this, and that way we could track them before they began, while they were doing the unit, and then at the end of the unit. So I developed this pre-test. So the pre-test asks the students what they know about the word sequence. So anything that they can tell me about the word sequence, even words, buzzwords that are related, like the words order, rules, instructions, anything that they could tell me about sequences, I wanted them to tell me. And then I also, for number 2, added a section for students to show me their understanding of a sequence non-linguistically. So this one asks students to label the steps of planting a flower without ever needing to write it down, without ever needing to read anything about it. This is especially good for my ELL student. This allowed her to participate in the activity or the pre-test with the other students. So this asks the students to put the steps of planting a flower in order. And then finally, number 3 asks students, can you please tell me the steps of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Now, this will come into play later, but I wanted the students to show me how they would give those instructions. So if I have no idea how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I've never done it before, what do you need to tell me? That way I can be successful. After having looked at the pre-test, you'll be able to see how that fits in with the objectives of the unit. So we have 3 objectives for this unit, and I use them as I can statements. So my students saw them as I can recognize sequences, order steps in a sequence, and explain the sequence or order of a task. Both the pre and post test are measured with this rubric right here. So we use standards-based grading here at Truman Elementary School. And so I wanted my students to have a way that they can see what their progress meant as far as which standard they belonged to. So each problem, number 1, 2, and 3, have a different point value. So problem number 1 has the possibility of 2 points. Having 2 points means that you can use the buzzwords to explain sequence, and then you can go into detail. Sequence means telling the order, buzzword, of something, giving instructions, another buzzword, of something, or telling me how to do something. And then they would go on to tell me an example or a way that they've used that word or use it in a sentence. If the student only gets 1 point for number 1, then that means that they're able to use the buzzwords, but they're not showing me that they quite understand what the word means. For number 2, there are a possibility of 4 points. To get 4 points for number 2, that would mean that the students correctly label each of the 4 pictures. If they only label 3 of the pictures correctly, they get 3 points. If they only label 2 of the pictures correctly, they get 2 points. If they only label 1 correct, they get 1. And if they don't label any of the pictures correct, they get 0 points. Finally, for number 3, how to do something, both the pre-test and the post-test ask the students to do this. However, the pre-test gives students a specific thing to give instructions for or show a sequence for. So the first test asks the students to please tell them how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. For the post-test, however, which we'll see later, it just asks the students to give the steps of anything that they want to describe to us. So in order to get 3 points, which is the maximum amount of points for this one, the students will need to tell me each step individually, so clearly label step 1, 2, 3, 4, or at least say first we do this, then we do this, so it's clearly laid out. They will also need to tell me all of the ingredients or materials that I need. So they're telling me if I'm making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you tell me to put the peanut butter on the bread, what am I putting the peanut butter on the bread with, right? Am I using my hands, or is there some tool that I'm using, a knife or a spoon, something like that? And then they're just wrapping all of this together with lots of detail. So if I have questions and I continue reading it, my questions are answered. If students get 2 points for this, that means that they've either given me all of the steps, told me about what I need, or told me how to do each thing, but they've left something out. So maybe they did forget to tell me what utensil to use to put the peanut butter on the bread, or maybe they kind of left some details out, right? That would be common knowledge. Like if you're making a sandwich, you need to put the pieces of bread together, but I want my students to be able to explain that. So if they're leaving those details out, they only get a 2. And then for only 1 point for this problem, either the students didn't use complete sentences, they're missing 2 of the 3 aspects of the problem we're looking for, or it just wasn't quite up to the standard and they're not able to describe it well. So as you can see also on the bottom of this rubric, it shows the conversion. So for standards-based grading, if students get 9 out of 9, that's 100%, or that's a 4 in the standards-based grading system. If the students get 8.5 points, so maybe they're missing some things, so 8.5 out of 9, that would be a 3.5. So they're almost at proficiency. They're definitely at grade level, but they're not quite getting those above and beyond points. If the students get an 8 out of 9, that would be a 3. So they're showing us we understand we're at grade level, but we're just missing those magical things, that extra spice, that extra detail that really hammers home that the fact that they understand. And then as you can see, it kind of goes down. So we have students in 4, 3, 2.5, and 2, and even some students at a 1 standard. So this is the chart that we're using, and this is how we graded all of the assessments that you'll see in the graph. Here are the results for our pre-test. So as you can see, we had 2 students that did not take the assessment. So I did not include them, and so instead of using 18 students to get to my mean, I only used 16. So I took all of this data and found the mean of the class, and it is, drumroll please, a 2. So that's not so bad, but that does mean that we are not at grade level yet. So I took this information and I thought about what would be the most helpful as I went forward with the unit. I decided that it would be really helpful for my students for them to see the real life impact of what understanding technical texts means. So I took that information, digested it a little bit, thought about what I should do in the classroom to really hammer this in and help my students understand. And that led me to creating one of my formal observations, which was a peanut butter and jelly lesson plan that kicked off this entire unit. So this is the lesson plan that kicked off my unit. Like I said, I wanted to bring really realistic things into this lesson and help my students understand why they needed to understand technical texts. So the first thing that I did was introduce the student learning outcomes from Truman Elementary School to them, which uses the acronym EAGLES. We focused on 2 of them. We focused on active and engaged learners, and also great leaders. So I wanted to do an activity that got my students' attention, got them thinking, but also gave them the ability to be in charge. Because, you know, when you sit down in the classroom and this teacher goes on and on and on, sometimes that just can feel, you know, mundane. That can feel like something that happens every day, and I wanted to mix it up. So the first thing that we did for this lesson was to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but it's not the way that you're thinking. As you can see here, I have only 2 students in the classroom with me, but that made this all the more fun. We sat down and I had them go back and forth telling me what steps to do to make these peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I gave them 2 opportunities. So the first round, we went back and forth and I did exactly what they said, and I didn't give them any opportunity to take it back or change what they said. But the second time we made the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I gave them time to rethink and rephrase what they had to say to make it more meaningful and to get the right results. Throughout the unit, we use different texts to help the students understand technical texts even more. So we presented 4 different topics to them throughout the unit that we helped them really dive into. We helped them define the words they didn't know. We helped clarify any of their questions, and then we gave them the opportunity to answer 7 questions every single time. And each of those 7 questions asks the students not only to answer the question, but to then go back into the text and verify their answer. So they needed to find the text evidence that proves their answer is correct, or at least proves why they chose that answer to be correct. And then at the end of this entire unit, so we had done 4 different readings, we've talked through them in class, we've answered the questions, we've gone over it, we've talked about how these things can apply to real life. It was finally time for our post-test. Here is our post-test. So the post-test follows the same exact format of the pre-test because it fits in with both the pre-test and the I can statements or the objectives. So number 1 fits in with the first I can objective, which is to recognize sequences. So the students are proving again that they recognize what a sequence is and they can describe it. The second problem fits in with the second I can statement, which is to order steps in a sequence. So again, we're asking the students to look at these 4 steps and tell us which one comes first, second, third, and then fourth. And then the third problem in this post-test fits in with the third I can statement, which is to explain a sequence or order of tasks. And this time, we're giving the students the opportunity to explain any sequence. Are you ready to get to the post-test? Drum roll, please. Boom, here it is. So as you can see, we still had 2 students that did not take the test, so I did not factor them into the result. However, I did have a student that turned in the test and turned it in and had actually none of the answers correct. I did include that in the result or the mean of the post-test score, and altogether the mean of the post-test is a 2.5. So in just this one unit, we had 0.5 points, you could say, of growth. So that brought my students from a 2 as a group to a 2.5. I would like to say that this makes me really sad, but it actually doesn't. I know that my students as a whole struggle with reading and math. Those are the 2 actually that we know nationally or globally are the issue, but my students really struggle with reading. And this was actually kind of motivating for me just to see in 4 weeks, when I'm kind of responsible for this part of their education, what can we do? So I know that 2 to a 2.5 is not the only growth that they have. We continued after the technical texts into scientific texts, and we continued to see even more growth with that. But let's get into the individual results for each of the students. So here are the results of the pre and post test together. So in yellow, you can see each of the students' scores on the pre-test. And in the turquoise color, you can see the improvement from where they were to their final score. So for the first student, you can see that this student had a 2.5, and then the time between when they took the pre-test and the post-test, they went from a 2.5 to a 4. So following that down, the second and third students both had a 2 and turned that into a 3. The fourth student had a 2 and turned that into a 4. The fifth student had a 1.5 and turned that into a 4. But when you get to the sixth student, you see something kind of interesting. So what happened here was that this student had a 3 on the pre-test, And when they took the post-test, they actually got a 2. So what you see there is that they declined in their score from a 3 to a 2. You can see that later it also happened to 2 other students. One student went from a 2.5 to a 2, and another student went from a 2 to a 1. I had 3 students that actually did not improve or decrease in their score. They stayed the same. I had 10 students increase their score, 3 students stay the same and 3 students decrease in their score. And again, we are not counting the 2 students that did not take the pre or post test. Here is a side-by-side example of one student's pre and post test. For number 1, as you can see, they were able to explain to me what a sequence was using 2 of the buzzwords, series and events, from our class sessions. She was also able to label all 4 of the steps for number 2 in the correct order, but I was blown away by her number 3. I was really excited by the way that number 3 was received for all of the students because it gave them the opportunity to explain something to us that they were an expert in. Instead of just like in the pre-test where I asked the students to explain how to make a peanut butter and jelly, the post-test allowed the students to choose not only what they were going to talk about, but how they wanted to explain it. I found that students were really forthcoming with the details of this, and a lot of them were successful in telling me the steps to making or creating or doing their activity. In the future, I will continue to use pre and post tests in my units. I found that it was a really great way to be able to track my students' progress and have concrete evidence as to where they are when. So if parents or other teachers or principals or someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, Miss Conway, I was wondering something about this student," I can pull out all of my information and say, "Oh yeah, my student was showing me that they were at this level, and now after we've done this, this, and this, they're at this level." And it also was really helpful for me to be able to look at all of that data and that information and see, am I being effective, or is there a way for me to differentiate that instruction and really show my students that I am understanding that they're kind of stuck, or that they need help, or that they want to learn something a different way? So I will definitely continue using this information. In fact, I would find it even more valuable if I had more opportunities for that formative assessment just to see where my students are. I think that it really is helpful for me as a teacher because if I continue to monitor my students' progress, then I will continue to reevaluate myself and make sure that what I'm doing isn't getting mundane or boring. Nothing I'm doing is distracting my students or taking away from the lesson or the objectives. And I just want to make sure that everything I do, my students are seeing that as a benefit to them and a benefit to their learning. My unit was a little bit thrown off this semester because instead of staying in Guam and continuing through the semester or this unit like I thought, I ended up moving across the world. So my family packed everything up, got on 3 airplanes, and flew from Guam all the way to Michigan. When we got to Michigan, we stayed, visited with family, then drove from Michigan to Pennsylvania, to Maryland, and finally to Virginia, which is where we are now and where we'll be for a while. So instead of getting to finish this unit like I thought I was going to, Mrs. Diaz and I had to tag team it and do it together. So the pre-test was given to the students by me online or in class, but the post-test was given to the online students by me, but to the face-to-face students, Mrs. Diaz was able to give that to them for me. We were able to finish the unit, but here is a look at all of the adventures that I had in between the pre-test and the post-test. Was a wild ride. I know that when you start going to school and you've decided that you want to be a teacher, this day's gonna come, but I hadn't gotten there yet in my brain. And so the whole time I'm going through classes, I'm really excited. I'm loving getting to know everyone that's in class with me. But the day that we finally got to step into the classroom and be teachers or student teachers was so exciting. I had no clue how much I was going to love student teaching, how much I was going to love working with Mrs. Diaz, but it was an experience that I will never, ever forget. Now that we're all the way in Virginia and I have a job, I'm so excited to get started. I'm going to go from 5th grade, which is the kids I'm working with now, and I'm going to start teaching 1st grade in the fall. So I'm just so excited and so thankful for all of the teachers that have poured into me and given me this education. I'm so thankful for my parents who have made it possible for me and encouraged me and listened to me explain all of the lesson plans I created in detail and pretended to be students. That way I could make sure I had all the details worked out. And I want to thank Dr. Green for answering all of my frantic phone calls where I needed to get clarification, or if I didn't understand something, or if I had to just ask her questions about student teaching. And of course, I want to thank my cohort, but especially my 3 ladies that were with me at Truman Elementary School. I just want to thank you guys so much for how fabulous you are and how you guys kind of welcomed me into your little family at school and helped show me what it was like to be in Guam and what it was like to just be a part of your little family for a while. And I just thank you guys all so much. And of course, I thank Mrs. Diaz, who welcomed me into her classroom, which is not easy, I know, and just took me under her wing and helped show me all of the things, and just helped me really figure out how I wanted to teach and what I needed in my toolbox to bring with me now that I'm in the States and starting my career. Has measured by this rubric right here. So the objectives for this unit, and I helped use those to dictate what to bring the here we go. So it's time to look at the post-test results. Are you ready? Drum roll, please. Here they are. So we are looking at to wrap it up. I felt that to understand what they